If Iran collapses, it won't just shake the Middle East. It could redraw the global power map overnight. Is the regime falling, or is something bigger happening? And this is the Middle Ground Mic.
Buddy, today we're going to dive into one of the most volatile political situations going on in the world right now, and how this man right here, Ram B, pretty much called it even when I wasn't sure. You know, millions of Iranian citizens, are wondering what's going to happen next, as well as a lot of us here in America. You know, I've got Ram B here with me. Ron, to me, this feels like one of those moments where history could turn fast. You know, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me. Yeah, it's an important turning point. I think as important as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, I think this is the most important moment, at least for the Middle East it is, since, 1979 when the Islamic Revolution happened, and it happened to be the same year as the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. So November and December of 1979. I was in Washington. I'd just moved there as a young man, and this had all started. So to see this come full circle is quite interesting.
Yeah, how was it? So before we even get in, we were talking before the show about the new possible supreme leaders. The one thing that, and I've talked a lot about Golda Gamari, and she loves the Shah, is is that, you say Raza, I believe, his son's name?
Reza Pahlavi.
Yes.
Yeah, his father was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and he was known as the King of Kings, the Light of the Aryans, and the Shadow of God. So he was emperor and sometimes took it a little too seriously, but his son seems to be wanting just to help in the transition, has a plan for it based on what he calls the Cyrus Accords, named after Cyrus the Great 2,500 years ago, who was a different kind of leader, was very tolerant of various religions, and the Persian Empire under him really did quite well. And so he's paralleling this, of course, with the Abraham Accords, where Arab countries were making peace with Israel in order to have better commerce, better relationship, and the like. And that's what he wants for Iran, not to be seen as the state sponsor of terror and proxies that won't allow Israel to exist.
Yeah, and I mean, that's pretty critical when you really think about it.
Yeah, it's unclear if all the people in Iran would want him back under the circumstances. I think sooner or later they'll talk to a variety of opposition leaders that mostly will have to come from outside the country, simply because those inside the country have been killed.
Yeah, I mean, does he, I'll make this kind of like a two-pronged question per se. Does he have legitimacy inside of Iran, and would the military there support him?
Yes, and I don't know would be the answer. Yes, he has legitimacy because over 80% of the country did not like living under Khomeini or Khamenei either. And so that means that there would be lots of support for anything other than an Islamic republic. That other 20%, however, includes the IRGC, the Basij, the guys that go out and shoot protesters on behalf of the Ayatollah, and the morality police, the mullahs, and the like. So the issue there will be, will the IRGC have defectors who will see that their time is very limited unless they switch to the other side? And another big part of this is the army. Will the army lay down its arms? It's not as ideologically tied to the Islamic Republic as folks might think, but what they do is also going to be very important.
Yeah, I mean, it will be. It's with young Iranians, especially considering the Ayatollah. Would they even want a monarchy back? Or I know that part of the world looks at government differently than we do.
That's a good question. I don't think they would. Some want to think back to the good old days of the Shah, where there was 22% growth because of the sale of oil overseas. There was an increase in the standard of living by 20% for most Iranians. And the Shah did pull Iran out of the Dark Ages into the modern world, but too fast for those that were the Shia clerics. And those are the ones, along with communists, that overthrew the Shah in 1979. So the issue is what parts of Iranian society, and it's a big society. There are 90 million people and over 100 different languages in Iran. So there's a lot of different ethnic groups, and they're going to have to get behind some notion of a secular, democratic system of governance, which they haven't had in 47 years. And I'm not sure a constitutional monarchy fits, but if the crown prince plays an important role in any transition, I don't have a problem with that, because he represents a lot of people in Iran that would like him to play a role, and I don't have a problem with that. But for us to pick who that should be is probably the wrong thing. The Iranian people need to pick their leaders themselves, and that's why you haven't seen any over-the-top, endorsements for the crown prince or anybody else for that matter. Why don't we wait to see what happens? First, you have to get rid of the mechanism of oppression that has been killing protesters in the streets, and that's the IRGC, the Basij, and the morality police. They've killed 48 leaders on the first day, 48, including the Ayatollah himself and members of his family. The former president, Ahmadinejad, who had threatened to erase Israel off the map, well, he's been erased. And so this is moving so fast that we'll have to just wait and see how this plays out, because you'll note that Iran didn't just lay down and go to sleep. They shot missiles back at Israel and 5 or 6 different Gulf states. And we've had American casualties, not many, but 2 servicemen and women have died, and many, another 5 have been injured. People have died in Israel. Rockets have been shot at Saudi Arabia, at Bahrain, where we have our 5th Fleet, the Qatar, where we have our largest base, in Oman, that held the peace talks, and of course at Israel, and at Iraq too. It's been haphazard firing. It's going mostly at civilians and not military targets, which has made the Arab Gulf states very mad. In fact, it's brought them together to say, stop this, and we'll do what we need to do to stop it, including Saudi Arabia. So it's fast-moving pace. The Israelis sent 200 planes in on the first day, used 2,000 munitions on the first day. We said 900 sorties, 900 the first day, including B-2 bombers from Missouri that flew in to hit ballistic missile sites and God knows what else. But let's just say that the Ayatollah's compound was hit with 2,000-pound bunker bombs, and those could be delivered by either B-2s or 15s, 16s, or 18s. Let's just say 30 bombs were dropped on the Ayatollah's complex, so anybody in there has now become a martyr, if you will.
That's a good way to say it, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's being polite.
Is this a strongman moment in the Middle East, or is this going to be a power vacuum moment? Because if it's a vacuum, then that's when it seems in the Middle East.
But what do you mean by a strongman moment? That somebody's going to rise to become the strongman, and
Yeah.
Well, if the strongman allows some sort of democratic evolution, I think that would be fine. But that hasn't always been the case in the Middle East. That strongman becomes the man. And let's remember that while the Shah did a lot for Iran, it also ruled with a pretty strong iron fist and didn't allow political opposition, and that will have to happen for this to evolve. Let's also think about the refugee problem. Where are all the refugees going to go? Turkey is worried about that, having expressed that they're not sure they want to have Iranian refugees. And of course, what happened in the Syrian civil war and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, many went to Europe and caused problems there for societies just because of different religions and different ways of life, but because it costs a lot of money to host refugees, as we know, in the United States. But at the same time, Iraq had 36 million people, and Afghanistan less than that, whereas Iran has 90 million. So that's quite a few. Not to mention that 4.5 million Ukrainians have already gone to Europe over the last 4 years. And so there's an immigration issue from political refugees that will have to be addressed rather quickly.
That definitely seems like that is going to be a problem for Iran,
Yeah,
and especially
I
with the
think so.
inflation.
I think so. And we have not seen the the overwhelming demonstrations in the streets that everybody's hoping for, because I think they're going to wait until more of the IRGC and the besieged are taken out, because people in the streets don't have any guns, and so they're just going to go in the streets. How are they going to take over a militarized opposition? That's a big question, unless the Mossad and the CIA are going to smuggle in weapons along with the Starlinks that they've already done to help organize the resistance. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because it was really a spontaneous, public protest that we saw in Iran. Across the board issues, economy, women's rights, the cost of energy, that kind of thing. And then now, why are you killing us, is part of the protest. But how you overcome the opposition that has the machine guns that mow you down, you're probably going to want to wait until they're a little less in number.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense. It make life a tad bit easier. And that'll feed me into one thing I'm going to ask about is, and this one fascinates me because I always kind of talk about it, is China and Russia, and we were talking about before the show, China and Russia didn't escalate it. They didn't posture the way many expected. Why? Because it seemed that's China's
they did come out with statements condemning the invasion, and their folks at the United Nations have said the same thing. Well, I think they're busy with other problems. Shall we say the Russians are now at the end of a 4-year war in Ukraine, and that has put an extreme strain on their economy, let alone their workforce, because they've lost up to half a million men. And 25,000 casualties, if you include both sides, every single week. You do that for 4 years, you do the math. We're looking at Verdun-like numbers of World War I. And so that's a big money pit for them, especially since they're under sanctions too. There's not much they can do other than, if they want to still focus on Ukraine, they wouldn't be able to help anyone, whether it be Venezuela, which they didn't help much either, or Iran. But I do note that the Chinese and the Russians did send in equipment, which didn't seem to help much. The equipment they sent was probably air defense systems, the SAM 300s and 400s, which the Israelis, whether it have been the Mossad or their Air Force, have taken care of with stealth, stealth air forces coming in and taking them out. Let alone, there's been a lot of cyber used to suppress air defenses and command and control. And when you take out 48 of the top leaders of the country, that tends to make things a little disorganized. So I think the Russians and the Chinese for that matter, they're worried about Japan, which is raising its military budget and says that it's not going to put up with China messing around. And by the way, they've noticed how Israel and America's military might has made short order so far of the Iranian military. They'd have to think twice about going after Taiwan, which we're required to defend under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. So they're all watching this very carefully, saying, maybe we ought to rethink this. Do they want to go to war over Iran? I don't think so. They certainly didn't want to do it over Venezuela, which is too far away from them. And I'm not sure that Iran is a vital interest for either of them either. It's nice, but for China, they bought cheap oil from Iran under the table because it's all sanctioned. And they also bought oil from Venezuela. Those two sources have since dried up. The strategic moves over resource control,
yes,
in both Venezuela and Iran are really real for China because they were depending on oil from those two places to run their economy. If their economy goes well, they make money and they can invest more in their military. See where we're going? And so this becomes a strategic plus to control the resources from places that have been fueling China.
Yeah, I'm gonna touch on not necessarily taboo, just me taboo against certain politicians' fans.
Okay.
It
well,
seems
not on the MiddleGround Mic.
no, it's I wasn't really per se around, but you were. It feels like President Trump is taking some pages out of the Ronald Reagan book approaching this China situation right now with, how he starved the Soviet Union, and Trump seems to kind of be wanting to starve the Chinese economy because obviously, and this is where I think it's come from against speculation. He could see the writing on the wall about the tariffs. So what's the only other way you can combat China outside of military is to
control the resources. Yeah. Well, that's a very astute observation. I think one thing that he uses the same phrase, peace through strength, that the military has to be strong and we have to, invest in our military, which our budget is absolutely humongous for our military. We have 11, 12 carrier strike groups where nobody else has either, even two. So the money goes to the military in order to maintain deterrence. And also when you need it in cases like Iran, you can put it to use. And I think he is like Reagan in as much as he believes in peace through strength, and he uses the term all the time. So that's a direct quote from Ronald Reagan. In terms of what Reagan did to the Soviet Union was to use the economic lever, but the economic lever was called competitive strategies. Competitive strategies was a Harvard business model that says that you always push your advantage against an adversary. If you're a business, it would be a competing corporation. If you're a country, it would be if you have a stronger economy, you use that as a lever to push your advantage. And that's what Reagan did by spending the Soviets into the ground on military matters with the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, also known as Star Wars. And Gorbachev at the time was trying to change things up in the Soviet Union. He admitted at Princeton afterwards, after the Soviet Union had dissolved, that it was the Star Wars that the Soviet Union could not afford to spend on it, and that it really accelerated the deterioration of the Soviet economy because they were spending too much on their military and not enough on consumer goods. So they're using economic levers somewhat differently. Tariffs are different than spending on the military only. With that being said, it looks like Trump is finding another way to keep tariffs around, but even if the Supreme Court has said that they're illegal. So that has yet to play out. But what is clear is control of strategic resources, and oil and gas is one of them, and strategic minerals are another one that he's playing that game pretty aggressively.
Yeah, it definitely seems like with the Supreme Court, and especially just as in general, they're becoming more of Congress needs to do its job. And when I've read a lot of the opinions, it kind of seems to be hey, you need to do your job. It's not our job to do certain things.
Well, yeah, and Congress has the power of the purse and it has the power to declare war. But the power to declare war in modern times has become complicated because if you start debating going to war, you put yourself at an advantage, and your soldiers and airmen and Navy personnel at a disadvantage because they could be attacked while you're debating. And so you lose the element of surprise. On the other hand, you lose the element of control or the power to declare war if presidents don't ever bring it to Congress anymore to get official authorization. They do have to go and within a certain time period, within 90 days, you have to go for an authorization of force. And ultimately, the ultimate weapon is Congress can decide not to pay for any more military equipment. They rarely do that. Why? Because then you're undercutting the American Armed Forces, all of whom have people that come from every state of the Union and all whose family vote. So it's a tricky business and has been very tricky since Vietnam with the War Powers Act. And there's that thing. And then there's also, it's tricky about when you go around assassinating political leaders. They don't call it that anymore. They call it, what is it? I wrote it down. Targeted killing. It's talk about a euphemism, but it's not a political assassination. And that came about during the War on Terror, and even President Obama used in order to be able to justify going after bin Laden as a matter of self-defense. And you could say that if non-state actors or state actors act as terrorists, that you're going after them as a matter of self-defense, especially if they every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they say death to America and death to Israel.
I mean, makes a whole lot of sense.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean.
So it's a tricky business, this thing called war and this thing called how do you change a regime without changing the personnel. Well, let's just say the top personnel of Iran has just been changed.
Not wrong at all. It's I guess the question with that would be, and this is why I say, because I think Iran attacked almost all of the Middle East countries that are aligned with us and have bases.
It went after all the Gulf state countries, 12 countries, including Israel. But it was sort of one of these sporadic, okay, we're supposed to push this button here, just send it. There were 300 to 500 missiles sent to Israel, another 500 sent around Arab states. They were hitting like the Kuwait airport. They hit a apartment complex. It was a little more concentrated on Qatar's airbase, but that was defended. In Bahrain, they went after the headquarters of our Fifth Fleet. And all of this was defended. I mean, all of these, if any of these Gulf states had any idea that Iran was pro-Gulf state, they are now anti-Iran thanks to these missiles that have been shot at them. So again, Iran is shooting itself in the foot by shooting its missiles at the Arabs along the Gulf.
Well, thinking of that and expanding upon it, is this going to strengthen, with Iran presumably weakening and them attacking the other countries / Gulf states, does that immediately strengthen the ties between Israel and the other Middle Eastern states?
It does, and it reinforces the Abraham Accords that says that, the real threat is not Israel, it's Iran. And that Israel has all this technology and has all this business that they could, develop together. And they also have the best intel in the world on Iran. So that was another reason why the Abraham Accords came about, because the United Arab Emirates has some island disputes with Iran. There's the Shia-Sunni divide between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the Sunni Shia divides within different countries like Yemen and also Bahrain, where the Fifth Fleet happens to be. Well, there isn't much difference now because they're seeing that the Iranians are the problem and not the Israelis. So it's reinforcing those accords, and you can see why Pahlavi would like to piggyback on that and say, well, let's have some Cyrus Accords and go back and be pals with Israel like we have been for thousands of years before 1979. And so we can be at peace and sell our oil to whoever we want and have a Western-like democracy back like we did before the Ayatollahs and the IRGC. Sounds good, but getting there is a big question. The people have to do something. There will be a power vacuum. And whenever there's a power vacuum, whether it be cartels or terrorists, somebody wants to step in and take over. And there is usually violence involved in the interim, if you think about it. And so that violence is happening now and will happen probably between the population and the IRGC and the Basij. The thing is, I don't see how that doesn't happen. And the problems that will create on the ground, we can't even see. It sounds great to say, take over your government, make it more democratic, but if you haven't had one in 50 years, and the one before that, it was better, but it wasn't what you would call a democracy. So it's going to be up to them to determine what to do. But I worry about, we can't tell them what to do, and I worry about letting them do it too. So it's a big question mark. You can't control the future of a country of 90 million. Those people are going to have to do it themselves.
Yeah, that's when you're thinking like there's 90 million people there. I'm not sure exactly how big the population is of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but do they recalibrate with Iran? Because I know obviously Saudi Arabia and Iran have had a long contentious history before this. But then
Yeah.
under President Biden, and again, I'm not making this like anti or pro Biden, but
Right.
whatever our policies were, at however they seem to affect Saudi Arabia, is all of a sudden Saudi Arabia started having a little bit more of an open time with cooperating with Iran. And then
Yeah,
as
well,
soon as
they
President
did
Trump
have
came
some,
about,
they had some discussions and the like, but whatever those discussions were, now that they have attacked Saudi Arabia, they might as well be discussions about fairy dust. In other words, just like, well, let's not, what is there to talk about? You're shooting missiles at us.
right?
Is that a basis of cooperation? No. So I think now the Arab states are also looking toward what happens in the aftermath of the collapse of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they have to figure how are we going to deal with the refugee issue? What are we going to do with the United States that has 40 to 50,000 troops here and it has its own interests? And what are we going to do with the oil that's, 1/5 of the world's oil supply that has to go through, be much easier if everybody got along to get through the Straits of Hormuz, which was shut down, by the way, or at least announced by the Iranians that they're shutting it down. But I don't think they can shut it down, but we'll see.
No,
Because most of their navy has been destroyed as of this morning, as I see it. And I'm sure that the Israeli part of their raids and part of our 900 sorties in the first day was to go after the defenses along the coast that had missiles that could shoot at shipping. So I think this is moving faster than we probably realize, and certainly in a pattern that the Israelis have used to take care of Hamas, to take care of Hezbollah, go after the leadership, go after the command and control, and keep going after the command and control, go after the infrastructure of oppression, which is also being done. The Israelis have been hitting intelligence as well as those that keep track of the citizenry and all of that. The Ministry of Justice, so-called, has been destroyed, and so has all intelligence buildings, and many of the IRGC barracks and whatnot are history too. When the dust settles, it's going to be very interesting to see what's left.
no, I mean, it definitely will. When you're thinking of that, and especially when you kind of go down that direction, Iran is known for being one of the primary sponsors of terrorism in the Middle East / around the world. And we know Syria just got stabilized. And ironically, one of the biggest faces of terror in Syria is now seems to be the face of stability in Syria. I believe he just signed something to recognize the Kurds and bring them back home and things of that nature.
Right.
How does this impact? Because I know they funded a lot of things, especially Iran was very heavily
Well, there's a
involved
problem
in
in Syria. They just opened up a camp of 10,000 ISIS families.
Jeez.
So that means that they were in a camp to make sure that they didn't develop terrorist attacks, and now we don't know where they are, what they're doing, and where they're going, and so that's a problem. Welcome to the Middle East. One things get solved, two things blow up. One step forward, two steps back. But it's in Iraq has a large Shia population, and the Sunnis, and I know I spent time with Iraqis during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Sunnis call the Shia in Iraq Persians because they think they take their orders from Tehran, and that's unfair. That's not true, but the Persians also, the Iranians use that also to infiltrate Iraq and to kill Americans during the Operation Iraqi Freedom, as General Petraeus has said many times. But the the idea here is that it's a very complicated ethnic mix in the Middle East with many ancient hatreds that go beyond our understanding, let alone our ability to control. And we should be very humble about moving in and telling anybody what to do. And I think we learned our lesson in Afghanistan and even Iraq, that a place that is not ready for democracy is not going to do it on its own and may resent it.
Jeez, I didn't read that. I mean, so I guess when you, especially when you talk about like resentment, right? I guess this is where it can kind of become even more critical. The military in Iran, right? Is it going to fracture or is it going to stay unified under the current regime?
Well,
Because I've
that's a
heard
great
reports.
question. That's a great question. One of the big mistakes in Iraq is they dispersed the army. They took away their guns. They go home to your families. Well, those are the ones that couldn't afford to eat, and so they worked with ISIS. So you don't want to disperse the army. You want to keep them, but you just want them to be. You want to be a power for good, and that would require retraining along different lines, and it would have to be Iranians training Iranians. We could help, and we have trained a lot of forces in the Middle East. But the disposition of the Iranian army is one of the key questions for the future of the country. You're right.
I mean, it's a critical spot, because the IRGC is known for being pretty strict and pretty brutal when it wants / needs to be, I guess, depending how you want to look at it.
I don't know if you could. It'd be asking, the Waffen SS to be able to tolerate Jewish people. It'd be asking them to be able to tolerate a Democrat. I don't think they could do it. So I think most of that organization is going to have to be purged, and and it may be on an individual basis. There was a friend of mine who I knew at the Pentagon who was born in Germany, and his parents were killed in the Holocaust, and he joined the American Army and was 18 and was an interpreter at the Nuremberg trials.
Oh.
Because he spoke German, they put him in charge of a district in Austria where they had to round up the Waffen SS and the Gauleiters of those who were in charge of the concentration camps and whatnot. So he had an assistant. He says, the assistant came to him and says, we just found the leader for this concentration camp. Should I go arrest him, arrest his family, and burn down his house?
That's a little dangerous.
Yeah. And Werner, this is my friend Werner, he goes, well, we don't do that in America. It's you just arrest the guy who is the Waffen SS, you leave his family alone and you let him live in a house. And so then it turns out that his assistant was a Gauleiter. And so he had to replace him with someone else, and they found someone else that they needed to arrest. And his new assistant came to him, shall we arrest his family and burn down his house? And so when something is as ingrained as that into a society, how do you change it? How do you change the IRGC that is ready to go arrest somebody, shoot their eyes out, hang them from a crane, or put them in prison until they die? How do you change that mentality to?
I don't know if you can.
I don't know if you can, and that's the challenge for that particular group. But the Army is a separate group, and I think that's why they're key. They're key to it, and you may even have some IRGCs that will see the writing on the wall and realize they have to change, and that's possible, but a lot harder for that group than it will be for the Army.
I can only imagine it's not going to be easy for any of them, really.
Yeah.
Especially, trying to stay united / against each other. You were talking about the Straits just a minute ago. So, let's talk oil. Oil is king.
Yeah.
Especially in the Middle East. Anytime there's instability in Iran, even with the sanctions that they've had on them for so long, anytime there's instability there that's been open, right? It always sends the oil markets off a cliff / spiking.
Yeah, I looked at the price of oil today, and it was up, $1 or $2. It's $73 a barrel, something like that.
Not too much panic.
No, not yet. If it goes over 100, that tells you people are really worried. Because it hasn't gone over 100, I think what the markets are saying is that the U.S. and Israel has this under control. And the other part of this, the only way that the Iranian regime was staying alive was selling bootleg oil under the table. Where does that have to go to get to China? Through the Straits of Hormuz. So shutting down the Straits of Hormuz means you're cutting off your only moneymaker.
That's
so you
never
can't
good for
shake your
business.
moneymaker if you've shut down the Straits of Hormuz. So
Yeah.
So and the other thing is that the world has diversified its sources. 20% of the world's oil flows through the Straits of Hormuz. That's still a lot, 20 million barrels a day. That's a lot. But at the same time, there are other places where oil can be shipped from now, and pipelines have been set up so that they can go somewhere else through Turkey, through Azerbaijan, through the other side of Saudi Arabia. They built a pipeline so it could go out, not through the Gulf. And let's not forget that there are other oil producers like the Brits in the North Sea and Venezuela and Brazil. And let's not forget Canada and the United States. So there are other places. The United States buys most of its oil from Canada and Mexico, not from Saudi Arabia. That became number 3, especially after the crises of 1973 and 79, when there was an oil embargo that sent our prices up all the way to, I think it was 75 cents a gallon during the first one.
I'd love that right now.
Yeah, wouldn't we all?
Oh my gosh. 75 cents a gallon.
Yeah, and that was outrageous. We should go to war over it, right?
Gosh.
Well, so, people waited in lines with odd and even license plates because they didn't have enough gas at the gas stations. That's when the discussion about becoming independent as far as our own energy started and continues to this day, doesn't it?
I mean, they still talk about it constantly.
Yeah.
Does this, with Iran and the energy and the oil, does that weaken China like we were kind of talking about earlier when this factors into it?
Oh, they have made up for it with right before the Ukraine war started in 2022. The Chinese made 10 oil agreements with the Russians because the Russians knew that they were not going to be able to sell their oil to Europe if they invaded Ukraine, and there would be an embargo on their oil through the Nord Stream and Oststream pipeline to Germany and Austria. And that came true. That shut down, and so they covered their bets by selling oil to China. And China can rely on that oil. I think a pipeline is also being built to China from Russia, so they do share a border. And China will rely much heavier on Russian oil unless it is sanctioned by the United States to say that if you buy Russian oil, then you can't trade with us. And
that'll get them
China,
to cut them off real quick.
Yeah, see what I mean? So this is all part of the game of energy dynamics and energy access, and who gets access to it. You want your friends to have it, your enemies not to have it.
So it seems like this is kind of, for the last several years, there's been the doom and gloom about Xi-Jinping, kind of having our number. What kind of seems now, I guess for me, this is kind of like a condensed moment from the 90s to the 1980s, where sometimes it seemed like the Soviets had our number. And then it would be like, oh, guess what? Actually, we had yours the whole time. We just didn't tell you. Kind of seems like that where it's going with Xi-Jinping.
Well, I think that's a pretty astute observation, because I don't think they really ever had our number. I think we had theirs, and that was an issue that just got discussed very quietly in plush chairs, around with a cigar and a glass of sherry or a glass of port, but not in public. Now everything's public, so it's good to be able to have programs like yours where you can discuss the pros and cons of strategy. And I think this is very important to realize that part of this game is part of this broader strategy to control the new access of upheaval, as I would call it, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and Venezuelans. And two of that quintuplet grouping happen to be in the news lately, Venezuela and Iran, because of resources.
And that's key when you really break it down, and China and then we'll feed into the big elephant in the room we haven't really deep dived into yet. The nuclear question,
that
we can't avoid it.
That will deserve a whole nother program because, there's a lot going on there.
Give a brief synopsis. I know you were saying earlier that before the show, it was like the rumors were, I believe, 2 weeks or something before they would actually have had a weapon, possibly, or something of that nature.
You mean the Iranians?
Yes, the Iranians.
Yeah, the Iranians. Well, of course, the Chinese have many. In fact, the New START treaty, which was set to expire this year, the Russians said they want to extend it with the United States. The United States wants to include China in the next one because they have been building without any restraints on their nuclear program. But the idea of Iran having a nuclear weapon was a no-go zone, especially for Israel. And there was, I believe, a statement by President Trump within the last couple of days where he said that Iran was within 2 weeks of getting a nuclear weapon, and that's why they decided to go in with Operation Midnight Hammer. And let's just say, I think that Operation Epic Fury is also going to have on the target list nuclear facilities to make sure that what may not have been destroyed in June gets destroyed this time.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense, really.
And if we don't want to do it, Israel's going to do it.
Right. And I mean, somebody had to, because as much as I am anti-war and anybody who's watched this show knows that I am not in favor of, poking the bear and starting another fire. But, I forgot who, I can't think of the famous actor, but essentially somebody had said, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, even if you don't like doing it.
I think this may be one of those cases. I think because if somebody, think if you're in Israel, and Israel, one of the biggest things for Israel is the Holocaust. And they didn't want to have an adjective in front of that for their modern history, nuclear Holocaust. And so when somebody in Mein Kampf says that they're going to destroy the Jews and you didn't believe it, well, they had to believe it after the Holocaust. And when somebody in Iran says we want to erase you off the map, they're building a nuclear weapon to do so, I think that would catch their attention. And it did catch their attention. That has been always in the back of their minds since at least 2005, when I heard all sorts of questions about their nuclear program when I went to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
I mean, gosh, Tel Aviv, not Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. My father-in-law, God, I don't know, the years have flown by. As you get older, time goes by faster. It was,
they say. So enjoy it a little bit more, Joe. You work too hard.
I'm always working, and you know that.
I know that. I don't know when you're not working. When you're walking the dogs, maybe.
Well, yeah, I wake up 6 o'clock in the morning, depending on what time my 7-year-old gets out of bed. And then, I had a guest on a couple weeks ago where she said, hey, unless you absolutely have to, don't look at your phone before 7 a.m. So I've been trying to do that. And actually, she was not wrong. And I have actually started to sleep better and been more productive throughout the day. So kind of taking a little bit of a step back in the morning. But, I wake up, I go to my main thing that I do all day. And even between there, sometimes if, I get some time, I might jump on and do something for the show. If I've got some time, then to go back to that, come home, narrate, and go back and forth and, hang out with the family. Then they go to bed.
Go interview guests.
Yeah, they go to bed. I come out here, edit, do whatever I got to do, update, then go to bed. And I tell people,
you're a force of nature. Just make sure that the force is with you and take care of yourself.
Yeah, oh no, most definitely. I mean, same with you. You work pretty hard too.
Yeah, I do.
For a gentleman that's retired, you work pretty hard.
I wouldn't call it retired. I'm just doing different things.
When I was when I was at we'll call it the store level, when the business would be open.
Yeah.
This was, I don't know, years ago. It was open from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. or midnight. I can't remember. I was pretty much up all those hours. Not that I had to be. It's just my mind would just race and going, well, I know at this time this could happen, or this time this is going to happen. Let me call them and make sure this is going to be ready. Let me call them, make sure this is done. And the people that are in the company that have come up under me and work under me, they tell people, they're like, listen, man, you really want to know what it's like to work for an intense boss? Work for that man for 5 years and you'll learn
Well,
routine real fast.
well, they knew what to expect.
Yeah, and that's routine can breed success in a lot of situations. Not every situation, but in a lot of situations. I've learned over the years that routine is good 99% of the time, but you got to have the 1% where you kind of lighten things up and go a little
Go have a
rogue.
beer.
Oh man, the good old days of my 20s. And I could handle that and still wake up the next day and have a couple drinks with the guys the night before and wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go right back to work like I had never. No, I do that now. It's got to be on a Friday or a Saturday. That ain't happening.
Well, at least you still do it, and that's good. Take care of yourself because you're very important to the public affairs community.
Hey, and I appreciate it. So are you. I mean, it's, who would have known that? Gosh, I forgot what was it. I was looking at Spotify recently, and I had really went through and somehow Spotify had the show classified as a lifestyle. So
Okay.
I was wondering why every other platform in God's green earth, my show is just
Lifestyles of the not so rich and not so famous.
right. And I'm like, how come I'm not getting so much exposure on Spotify? Well, I went through and I used AI and Spotify tried to tell me, oh no, whatever your hosting provider says you are, that's what you are. And I'm going, well, let me screenshot it, send it to you. News politics, and they're going, well, that must not, you must have just changed. I said, no, I only switched news commentary than news politics, but and they were like, oh, okay. So as soon as it took a couple of weeks, they finally swapped it around. And
well, it's interesting. I do a lot of commentary for radio and TV. Some stations think I'm the North Korean expert. The others, I'm a foreign policy expert. And the others, I'm a national security expert. And I say, yes.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call me, that's what I am.
No, 1,000%. It was weird. Once I did that, I have good analytics on Apple, and I'm not knocking Apple at all. I think my average watch time on Apple is about 34, 35 minutes.
Yeah.
That's for the majority.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's good. About 30, 40% watch the majority, if not all the episode. And so when I was talking to this guy Donald yesterday, and he runs Barracks Media, he goes, that's crazy thing. And then he goes, well, what are your Spotify metrics? So we did screen share, and he goes, you've got a 51% conversion rate of when my show pops up on someone's search feed or on their homepage on Spotify, 51% conversion rate. And then out of that, close to 40% watch more than 36 minutes of the show. And he said that is
attention spans being less than a gnat's, I'd say that's pretty good.
Yeah, because I learned from one guest. His name's Joe Egger. I had done that almost 2-hour episode in Ukraine with him, and I learned a lot from him on that because he goes, well, he's about politics. He does a lot of real estate development. He goes, I listen to your show on my AirPod when I walk my dogs or when I'm walking around a building by myself in the morning. And I was like,
that's cool.
Oh, okay. So that's why I kind of started to gear some things to make it so somebody could do that, and it becomes a little bit more productive and people like to be around, and people love hearing about foreign policy without hearing how every single person in the world is terrible and everybody should die. I think people have grown tired of that.
Well, I certainly have, and I'm glad that you have too, because I think you should be able to discuss things that are so important without calling each other, Hitler or Stalin.
Yeah, I'd posted on a protest group. I said, hey, it was local here in Michigan. I say, hey, would anybody like to just...
You dipped your toe in that water?
I was like, hey, does anybody want to meet up and just kind of honestly talk about this, right? Just a polite discussion, nothing, I said, I'm not one of them gotchas. I'm not one of them guys that's here to get everybody all mad. And no, right. I just want to say, like, hey, is there
What'd they say?
Well, if you're middle, you support Nazi policies and genocide.
Oh, boys.
And I was like, all right, well, I'm leaving this group now.
Yeah.
I said, obviously there is no middle ground here whatsoever. You cannot find balance there. I did find a couple of people from there that became fans of my show, but as a group, it was just not an area where it seemed to be where they were even open to talking about it.
Well, I think there's not. I mean, the First Amendment gives you the right to be wrong.
Right.
All right. And it also gives you the right to be stupid, because if you haven't done your homework on these things, you're wasting everybody's time by just calling people names. And you might as well be in kindergarten, because that's about the level the discussion is when you're doing ad hominem attacks. and moving in that direction rather than moving in a direction where there's understanding between those in the room, and that there may be a way to move forward without digging yourself into the trenches of World War One and re-arguing the same arguments that have already been argued time immemorial, but more articulately than with, oh, I'm just going to, smash you in the face because I can't say anything, or I'm going to yell at you during a State of the Union address because I disagree with you, or I'm going to yell back because I disagree with you. It's almost like we have not taken a course in civility or manners that used to be part and parcel of our upbringing. And I'm not sure why that's the case now, but it sure makes it more difficult if you're trying to do something like you're trying to do, just to try to get the facts out there so you could have some sort of intelligent discussion about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not an easy thing to do these days. That
No,
is for
it's not.
sure.
But and I've been in some situations where it hasn't been easy. And I've been in some situations in a foreign language where I was put into a communist area of Germany to talk about what was going on in foreign policy, and everybody saw me as the American in the group, and I just spoke from the heart. I know that you guys all believe in communism, and that's your right, but I don't, for the following reasons: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can accept that or not. That's fine, but well, tell me your point of view and why are you so obstreperous about it? And we had a good discussion, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, especially communism. Folks got to realize that communism is just kind of like pure libertarianism. It just will never work.
Well, and because they don't believe that you can work within the system,
Right.
you have to overthrow it, and we know from most communist systems that doesn't work.
No, it does not. So, is there anything you want to throw in here with the people we may not have covered that they're thinking about Iran that is just kind of like that? Hey, maybe you didn't think of
Well,
this.
I think we need to watch this very, very carefully because I think it's going to be at least several weeks of attacks because the missiles are starting to fly in the other direction towards Israel and towards the Arab states and towards our bases, frankly. And I think until that stops, you're not going to see any movement in the streets, or very little movement in the streets towards change of government. And what the Israelis and Americans are going to do is systematically dismantle the Iranian regime as it is now. Take its military, take its nukes, its ballistic missiles, and its support for proxies away. What they wanted in the original negotiations, and once you do that, you also free up the protesters so that they won't get shot anymore, and they can reorganize a government that will undoubtedly look better than what they had. We don't know yet what it is, but it's like someone once said in Parliament. I think it was Oliver Cromwell during the English Revolution. He says, "I may not know what I want, but I know what I don't want." And the Iranian people know what they don't want. I'm not sure they know what they want at the moment, but anything would be better than what they have.
I would imagine. What was the last inflation rate? I believe there was like 40 or 50% last I had heard.
Yeah, 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 something like that.
It's just insane. And I mean, good grief, we're all complaining over here about 7% and 3%.
Yeah,
50%, we'd probably be in the streets protesting or rioting too.
yeah. Well, it's amazing what lack of food, lack of water, lack of hope, lack of freedom, lack of a family member that's been arrested for no good reason because they dressed the wrong way. It's amazing what that will drive people to do when just simple freedoms, the ability to raise a family, to put food on the table and go somewhere once in a while, different from where you live. That's what most people want, without being oppressed or shot at or told what to do or overtaxed or overburdened or over everything. So I think, the Iranian people are very proud, very smart, and have a tradition of being very successful. I'm going to retain the hope based on what I know about their culture, to think that they can come through this in a much better position than they've been in the last 47 years.
And I think that they definitely will. I mean, they've got a lot more gall than a lot of people do. I'll say that. Just the fact that they knew what the consequences would be and they stuck up for themselves, and that's not an easy thing to do.
And over 30,000 paid with their lives.
And that's just not easy.
Since December. I mean, that's less than 3 months. So it's amazing how fast this evolved, and we'll keep track of it because I think it's important for us to understand. I wish people would look at it more from the perspective of the Iranian population and also from the perspective of the Israeli population that really happen to be in the crosshairs, being so in the Middle East, that if a nuclear weapon were attached to a ballistic missile that was raining down on Israel since 2005, that you can understand why they were so upset about Iran's every day waking up and saying death to Israel and death to the United States.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, Ron, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure you'll be back on soon with how fast this seems to unfold in this day and age.
Yeah, I have a feeling we'll be talking soon, and that's fine because I enjoy it, and you're good at moderating, and you're good at getting the word out.
And I appreciate you coming on. Everybody stay tuned because there's going to be more. Drop your predictions down in the comments because, when power shift, history moves, and Ron has a wealth of knowledge. So the comments you guys give us, maybe we'll put one on the next show and we'll explore it. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I hope everybody has a good day.
Thank you.